consultant and art installer here, and I'm going to walk you through how to install a triptych art piece like this 3-piece we have here. So the first thing you want to do is figure out where you want it to be, and then visually figure out your gaps. So I just place them below where it's going to go. If it's on the back of a sofa, I tend to prop them up on the back of the sofa just so that everyone can get an idea of how far apart they're going to go and where we want to center it. In this case, I'm going to center it between this bookcase and this bio sign on the right hand side. We're in our art gallery right now, and so it's a little bit more snug than it would probably be at your home. But first I'm going to figure out my center, and my center is going to be from there to here. And then I want to figure out my gap. So this is when I start to play and move the pieces around, take a step back, look and see what looks best from the viewing distance. So if you're going to be viewing it closer, like over a sofa, and generally you're right next to the sofa, or you're walking maybe across from the coffee table, you might have them about 2 inches, one inch apart, 2 inches max, so maybe 1 to 2 inches. If you're going to be viewing it at much farther distance, generally it's about 2 inches, maybe 3 inches. So if it's at least 10 feet, maybe 15 feet away, and that's where you're always seeing it, go for around 3 inches apart. So once you figure out your spacing and you figure out where your center is going to be, then we're going to start with the center panel. The center panel is the most important panel because this one needs to be centered, it needs to be leveled, and once that happens, you work your way out. If you don't center and level it, everything's going to be askew and it's going to look like stairs. So we're going to start with this panel. And what you want to do before you start hanging your art is you just want to double check your wire. So on the back of all of our triptychs, we'll have a wire. And because these are tied by hand, they're all going to be slightly different. Now, sometimes it's a lot different. Generally, it's 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/2 inch different. So I like to turn them around, and then I'm going to measure. What you want to do is get the weight of the piece included in that measurement, because if you don't, once it's hanging on the wall, it's going to tug a little on the wire, and you're not going to be quite as accurate as you thought. So I'm going to just grab it, lift up slightly, and I've got 14 inches. Now let's see if the other ones are the same. Let me grab it, lift up slightly. So I'm just under 14 inches on this one. I'm 13 3/4. And let's do this one. I'm going to say 13 3/4. So what I want to do before I go any farther is not forget that they're a little bit different. So I like to leave myself a note on the wall so that as I'm leveling my hooks, I take into consideration the fact that we are 1/4 of an inch different. So I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch up on both of my side pieces. So I tend to just stick a little note here, 1/4 inch up. Leave these little notes where I will remember when I'm doing my measurements over there. Okay, I tend to do them sideways so that I know that it's not like a mark for where I'm going to put the hook. It's a reminder. So I tend to do it a little bit off so that I remember that. I like to make arrows that I will use as my marking point later on. So I just make some arrows on my painter's tape. I make sure that it goes all the way to the end. I want to be really sure what my mark is, and if you don't go all the way to the end and you don't do a mark on that painter's tape, you tend to get lost and you forget what's your mark. So I make myself some arrows. Usually I make about 5 arrows and have them just stuck to the wall so that they're easy for me to access and I can grab them when I've got my hands full and use them to mark my locations. All right, now that we have our markers set up and we've got our measurements on our wires, we're going to move the pieces to a safe location so that you can move easily under here and not drop anything on your art. Okay, now we're going to find our center location on our wall. If you're doing it over a sofa, you're going to want to figure out where your center is from the farthest out, like the arm, not just the back, considering the arm too, and finding your center location there. If you're not centering over that, if you're right justifying or left justifying, you're gonna figure out what your center is based on those measurements. So in this case, we're going from the edge of our sign to our bookcase to find our center. Now that the artwork's out of the way, I'm gonna move these into a clear location that is not about my measurements. I wanna know what one is my measurements. Since our total was 106, half of that for us is 53 inches. So I'm gonna mark 53 inches on my wall. Next, I need to figure out the height of my artwork and figure out where I want that to be placed vertically on the wall. So measure your overall piece. If you have a frame on it, it's going to be larger than the size of the art that you purchased. So that's why you wanna measure. So in our case, we are just about 60 inches. Okay, now that you know the height of your piece, you need to figure out where you want the vertical center to land on your wall. Now, generally, the appropriate hanging height is between 60 and 66 inches vertical center. That means this part. So where do we want the art to land this way? Generally, you want it to be about eye level for the center of your artwork. Now, if it's in a commercial space, you're gonna wanna land around 63 inches because you wanna split the difference and have the average adult height. If you're a home of smaller people, you're gonna wanna go closer to that 60 inch. And if you guys are tall, go closer to that 66. Find out what's right for you. If it's hanging above furniture, you're gonna wanna take that into consideration. So first figure out where ideally it would land for your eye level, and then figure out where it's going to work best with any furniture below. So sometimes that means we shift up a little bit, sometimes that means we have to shift down a little bit. If I was going above a table, a console table, or something like that, or a sofa, you're gonna want at least 8 to 12 inches above that surface to allow a little bit of breathing room. So in this case, we're gonna figure it out on the wall with painter's tape first and find what feels right. I'm gonna start with 63 inches and see where we're at. So now we're gonna take the overall height of our artwork. It was 60 inches, and we're gonna find the vertical center, which is half, 30 inches. So I'm gonna put my 30-inch mark right at my mark that I made for my vertical center. My full artwork is 60 inches, and now what I'm gonna do is put a mark at the bottom of my artwork and put a mark at the top. And now I'm going to hold up the artwork within those arrows and have everyone take a look at it and make sure we all like how it looks in this location. At those lines, and make sure that that's where I want the artwork to be. This is where you would make your adjustments, usually taking turns, someone holding the art and someone else stepping back and taking a look, making sure that this is exactly where we want the vertical height to be. So to give you a quick recap of what the marks are on the wall, just in case you got lost, we have our horizontal center marked of our wall. Then we have our vertical center marked of our artwork. From there, we've got the bottom of our art marked and the top of our art marked. In addition, because our side panels are slightly different than our center panel, we have a reminder note roughly in the locations that those panels will be, so that when I'm leveling everything out, I remember to make that final adjustment for the wire difference. Now we're going to mark our wire location. If you recall, our wire was 14 inches down from the top of our artwork. So we're gonna take the mark of the top of our artwork on the wall and measure down 14 inches. Now I need to center my mark that I just made with the center of the wall. It's just slightly off, so I'm gonna just shift it over slightly. So that I'm in the center of my wall. All right, now I'm going to remove the marks that I no longer need and add one more. I'm gonna shift my horizontal center of my wall down to below my artwork. So I'm going to take my level and I'm going to take this center line and my bottom of artwork line, and I'm going to add one more mark down at the bottom where my wall center is. I want it to be below my artwork so that as I'm hanging the art on the wall, I can see that mark and make sure that I'm hanging it in the center. Okay, we're going to remove the marks we no longer need so we don't get confused. We no longer need the top of the art. That one's going to come off. We no longer need the center of the wall because we've marked that again lower below the artwork so we can see it. And we no longer need the mark that's the bottom of the artwork. So we are left with center of the wall and the wire line. So now we're going to take our first drywall hook. My wall is drywall. If you don't have drywall, you may need to get another hook, but we do provide a hook for each of your panels with all of our wire hung artwork. So you're going to take your first hook, and the important thing to remember is all of our measurements had to do with our wire location. Our wire location is at the bottom of this hook. Sometimes people forget and they use the nail location. We want to make sure we remember the bottom of the hook is the mark that we just put on the wall. So you're going to take that, line it up with your arrow, and hammer it in. So one thing I like to do is not hammer in my nail all the way, especially if you're into a stud, because it can be hard to get that hook out if you need to readjust it for some reason. The other thing I like to do is put the soft side of Velcro on the end of my hammer, just in case I have to get in there, get under that nail and get it out. This protects my wall from getting the gouges that the hammer usually makes on it. So I leave myself just a tiny bit so I can get in there and pull it out if I needed to. Now I'm going to take my center panel that we've been measuring, and I'm going to turn it upside down so that I can find my center mark on the bottom of my panel. The panel is 30 inches wide, so I'm going to mark 15 inches on the bottom of my panel. This is why I like using that painter's tape, because it doesn't damage your artwork when you put a mark of painter's tape on it. Okay, now we're going to hang our artwork on the wire. The reason we give you these big hooks, you don't need this size of hook for hanging this weight of a piece, but it's easier to get your hand back there and get it up on the wall. Now comes our handy center marks. We've got the center of our wall marked and the center of our center panel marked. This is very important. If for some reason you are not exactly center on this, everything's going to shift over. And if you make the mistake of centering off this location that is not centered, everything's going to be off. So now we're going to just double check and line it up at the bottom. Checking our level, make sure we're in the right spot. So our artwork is level, our center marks are lined up. We know we've got our center panel in the right location. Back up, double check, make sure you like how it looks. Okay, now we're going to take this center panel off, set it aside again, and use this center to work our way out to get our accurate measurements. Now we can take the tape off of our center mark. This is what we're going to use for the rest of our measurements to create the marks for our other wires. All right, now we're going to figure out our other hook marks based on the width of our panels. In this case, all three of our panels are 30 inches wide. Sometimes our center panel will be larger, and that's why you need to double check your measurements. The distance from our center hook to our side hook is half of a panel plus your gap and half of the side panel. So in this case, we have 15 inches. We're going to go 1.5 inches, and we have 15 inches. So that is 31.5 inches. So now we're going to measure out that 31.5 inches over and put a mark on the wall. So we've measured from our center panel out 31.5 inches for our left panel hook. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we've just measured our horizontal distance out from our center hook to our side hooks. Now we need to figure out where that lands vertically on the wall and add in our reminder of 1/4 of an inch. So what I'm gonna do is first level it based on my center hook, making sure I've got a marker nearby so that I need it. I'm gonna take my level and go from my center hook, finding my level, and then marking my level. Which was the exact spot that I happened to put it. Okay, now we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Finding our level and marking that level. If you wanna double check, you can do it the other way. I'm a little bit short, so sometimes it's helpful for me to see under. So in this case, I was pretty spot on with both of them when I eyeballed it. That doesn't always happen. Usually I'll land just slightly off because I was eyeballing my first measurement. And then you're gonna take this new piece of tape and use that as your guide and take the old piece of tape off. In this case, I was already there, so I'm gonna leave that one. And now we're gonna take our reminder of 1/4 inch up, and we're gonna adjust this, which is now level. We're gonna adjust it 1/4 of an inch up so that we're correct with the wire on this piece. So we're gonna take that extra marker and go 1/4 of an inch up. And now that new marker is the bottom of our hook. You can remove the old mark if you'd like to and leave that one. Okay, same thing on the other side. Once again, I happen to be spot on. That generally doesn't happen. So I'm gonna use my original mark. I'm gonna take my reminder, and in this case, this one is also up 1/4 of an inch. If yours is not, you're just gonna adjust it, whatever that difference is. And we're gonna go 1/4 of an inch up. And that is gonna be our new hook bottom location. Okay, so now what we have left, we have our center hook, which has already been installed. We have the location of our side panel hooks, which have been leveled based on our center hook, and then adjusted up or down based on the actual wire of each side piece. Now, if I have a laser level with me, I love to use a laser level at that leveling because it's a lot easier than trying to hold this level and get those little pieces of tape on there. If you don't have a laser level, that's okay. A long level will work nicely for you. If you don't have a long level, you can take a smaller level and attach it to a 2x4 or a piece of wood and use that as well. So now we have our locations for our last two hooks. We're gonna put our last hooks in there and see where we're at. All right, same thing, remembering the bottom of our hook is the mark of our arrow and hammering it in. Same thing on the other side. All right, we have our hooks installed. Now it's time to start again with our center panel. Most important thing is making sure our center panel is again centered, and then work our way out from there. All right, now our panels are up. We're gonna check our gap. So we want our spacing to be about 1.5 inches. In this case, oftentimes I'm 1 inch, and I like to use my roll of painter's tape because that's a quick inch. But in this case, we're gonna go 1.5 inches. And you wanna check the top and the bottom because they will be different. I try not to move my center panel because that has been leveled and centered. 1.5. Okay, so we've got our spacing correct. We have our center panel was leveled, we're gonna start again with our center panel, level it again, and work our way out. Make sure our side panels are level, as well as the same distance top and bottom for our spacing. All right, so our center panel is still level. We're gonna move our way out to our side panels. And we're pretty good. So one thing to remember is that these pieces are handmade. So our corners sometimes will have a larger fold from the canvas overlapping. So you do want to be mindful when you're taking your level to take that into consideration. In this case, this panel is perfectly flat on the bottom. Looks like the folds have happened on the sides. So your level will be accurate. And in this case, we are really level all the way across. If at this point you find that you're slightly off, you're 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch off, you can gently grab your artwork and pull down very slowly, very gently. It will adjust, a micro adjustment of up to 1/4 of an inch. But you don't want to do that step until you have leveled your side panels to your center panel. You do want to check your level on both your sides and your bottom, just in case it's slightly different, because that will impact how you view your spacing. Sometimes it'll read level at the bottom, but not read level on the sides, like I mentioned with that fold of the canvas. You just want to double check all of it. Make sure you're happy with the spacing. Stand back, double check that everything looks good from a distance. Now, here's something to note. Sometimes the horizon line, if I were to take these 2 pieces of canvas and set them on the ground, the horizon line would match up. But because I'm now on the wall and I have a funky wall right here, so our wall is not flat. Most walls are not flat. So if you run into a situation where things don't seem to be lining up, after you've done all of your mathematical measurements, adjust for your eye. So sometimes it could be lighting, like our light right now is casting odd shadows in this gap, different from this gap. And so sometimes that's gonna look a little bit different and throw off how it looks. And you wanna make sure everything looks good to the eye as well. So once your math is correct, adjust to your eye. Oftentimes your ceiling is not going to be level. Your floor is not gonna be level, which is why you wanna use your level and making sure that your level is getting you accurate, not just measuring up from the ground and assuming it's the same all the way across, because nothing's level in construction. I've had situations where the ceiling was so slanted that I had to slightly adjust the art to match that slant so that it looked level. So now you're gonna adjust for your eye and go from there. All right, almost there. This is the final step that I like to do. You don't have to do this, but I go crazy if I see a 3-piece and I constantly have to straighten it. So anytime something is a 3-piece, or if it's in a hallway, above a sofa or a bed, any place that has a lot of movement happening near it, I like to use command strips. And the reason I like command strips is it doesn't tear off your wall if for some reason you need to remove it. So you can use Velcro, you can use command strips, but I like to use a command strip as my final step in making sure my triptych stays in the location that I put it in, because all it takes is one person walking by, bumping the art, and then it's crooked. So I take a command strip and I'm gonna put it at the bottom center of each piece. Now, because my wall is not exactly flat in the center, I may have to find the location where the art meets the wall. You most likely won't have to do that, but just keep that in mind if you're having trouble getting that command strip to stick. So before I take that center off of my center panel and my wall, I'm gonna do my command strip, make sure I'm still level when I lock it in, and make sure my side pieces are still level based on my center. All right, so you're gonna find the location that the art is touching the wall. Before you do, you can pop those little bumpers off of the back. You don't need them if you're gonna use command strips. They are there just to grip the wall and keep it in place, but a command strip works better. So that's why I like to use that on a triptych. Let's find our spot where it touches the wall. In this case, it's the entire panel. So I'm gonna just put it on the bottom of the artwork. I'm gonna grab my level, and I'm gonna keep it level as I push it against the wall. You've just hung your first triptych. Congratulations on your new artwork from Latitudes. If at any point you get hung up, feel free to reach out. We'll walk you through it. And if you have any further questions, let us know. Thanks so much and enjoy.